You're listening to 9 Plus, a research podcast from WIT. Hello and welcome to 9 Plus. My name is Rob O'Connor. This is the 11th episode of the podcast so far, and with each one I'm learning more and more about the kind of research that's going on here in Waterford Institute of Technology. In this episode I'm speaking with three people from the Ocular Therapeutics research group, OTRG, about the work they're doing to help people with sight loss and other issues related to the eye. The panel features Dr. Larry Fitzhenry, Dr. Niall O'Reilly and Tess Ames, who describe their research, the people involved, their motivation for getting into this and the potential impacts of their work. Later in the podcast, they list some websites you can visit if you'd like to learn more about their work, but the handiest place to go is pmbrc.org, the umbrella site for the Pharmaceutical and Molecular Biology Research Centre, PMBRC, to which the Ocular Therapeutics Research Group belongs. If that all sounds a bit confusing, don't be put off, as Tess, Larry and Niall explain it all during the conversation. So let's begin with today's panel introducing themselves.
My name is Niall O'Reilly. I'm Centre Manager of the Pharmaceutical and Molecular Biotechnology Research Centre, PMBRC, here in WIT.
My name is Larry Fitzhenry. I'm a lecturer and researcher here in the Department of Science. I work in the PMBRC and I'm the principal investigator of the Ocular Therapeutics Research Group.
My name is Tess Ames. I'm a project manager within the Ocular Therapeutics Research Group for the project Orbital, Ocular Research by Integrated Training and Learning.
What is the relationship between the Ocular Group and PMBRC?
So we're all members of the PMBRC.
So what is PMBRC actually first?
I'd probably give that one to Niall. He's the expert on that one.
So it's a research centre here in WIT, and obviously, as the name suggests, a lot of pharmaceutical, biology, molecular biology, biotech type research is carried out in PMBRC, and the OTRG then would be a subgroup of that. Okay,
and what does PMBRC stand for?
Pharmaceutical and Molecular Biotechnology Research Centre.
Isn't it just as well you got that right?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay, and so the Ocular Therapeutics Research Group is a subgroup of that.
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
okay, right. I get where you're coming from. So, what is the overall aim or responsibilities of the Ocular Therapeutics Research Group? Larry, we'll go to yourself for that.
Yeah, I suppose what we really focus on is the delivery of drugs or therapeutics to the eye. So the eye is really well designed, part of the human body. It's designed to keep everything out and keep the eye working as it does. So infections, bacteria, viruses and so on, it works really well to keep those out. But part of that problem then, or part of that good behaviour is that it stops drugs if something does go wrong. It's really well designed to keep those drugs out as well. So our therapeutics are treatments for the eye. So what we work on is designing systems that can better help those drugs get to the surface of the eye, get into different parts of the eye and to treat diseases and problems that people might have in their eye.
So on a previous episode, one of your students, Madry, was in, and she was looking at areas of, if I'm probably getting this incorrect now, but drug delivery without having to stick a needle into the eye. Obviously, that's I'm not an expert in this, but obviously it's a very invasive process. You don't want to stick a needle in your eye if you can help it. So you're looking at ways to take that medium out of the equation and have something that's less invasive and possibly more sustainable for long-term drug delivery. Would that be
absolutely
fair?
And we look at a couple of different things. So for those things that where you have to get an injection into the eye, that would be where it's a disease or a condition that affects the back of the eye. Okay, so the eye is roughly split into two, the front, which we can all see, and then the back, which is everything behind that. And for those treatments you'd often have to get an injection into the eye. So as you can imagine, sometimes people are not too crazy about getting those injections in the eye, and they can have some serious side effects as well. So what we're looking at then is ways of whether it's just to use an eye drop maybe, where people can use a drop once or twice a day, and that will reduce the need for injection. Or even we could look at a contact lens, for example, where people can just put on a contact lens. It will release that drug or that pharmaceutical to the eye, and over time that will then travel to the back of the eye.
And this contact lens delivery is quite new. This is a novel area, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, only in the last 6 months, the first ever marketed or approved product has now been approved by the FDA in America. It's approved by the regulatory authority in Canada and Japan as well. So this is a contact lens that delivers for allergic eye conditions. So it releases drug over a period of time. So that's the first ever marketed product. So researchers have been looking at this for a number of years, but again, it's probably in the last maybe 20 years. They've been talking about it since the 60s, but really it's ramped up in the last few years.
Okay, so this is broadly the area that you're operating in. I know it's not the only area you're operating in, but it's the area that we're talking about today. So talking about therapeutic delivery of drugs and therapies to the eye. Well, let's figure out where you came from, because none of you are eye surgeons. Would that be correct? None of you are opticians. None of you have a medical background. Isn't that fair enough?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That is accurate.
So how do you end up here? How do you get to this point? So I might just ask you briefly where your own professional journey has taken you. I mean, for example, when you were doing your leaving cert, or Tess, from your accent, when you were in high school, did you say, I really want to do, therapeutic delivery, a non-invasive drug delivery to the eye? How do you get to that point? So, sure, Larry, we start with yourself. How do you end up here?
Yeah, I suppose for me, in secondary school, I definitely wasn't thinking about really science or even eye conditions, as you tend not to. So I ended up going to the army. I finished school, didn't even finish school, ran off to the army somewhere around 5th year, whatever transition year is these days. Stayed there for a few years, and then after that, kind of realised actually there's something else I want to do. Left the army, did a couple of different things along the way, but ended up ultimately around 24 as doing an undergraduate degree here in chemistry. I think it was Bachelor of Science in Chemistry with quality management at the time, and did that for 4 years. Loved every bit of it, to be honest. WIT, great place, but really, really, really enjoyed the undergrad degree, and got to the end of that then, and it was, what do I do next? And I'm sort of a one step at a time kind of man, and then eventually it was suggested to me to apply for PhD funding. I didn't really even know what a PhD was, to be honest, at the time. I'm not sure I do even now. I'm trying to define it recently, but and that was I was working at the time with Peter McLaughlin and Pat Duggan on my and Peter's now the head of the School of Science, and Pat has since retired, but I was working with them on my 4th year project in an area called molecular imprinted polymers. So I won't bore you with the details of that, but ultimately then I applied for a PhD in that area under their supervision. And the idea was that we would develop a material that was just capable of releasing a drug for a long time. And at the time, there was some research going on about what we could look at using those materials for, and ocular drug delivery, or drug delivery to the eye was where that went. So over those 4 years, just the interest in that area grew. Got my first postdoctoral project when I finished that, or postdoc contract when I finished my PhD, again with the team at the PMBRC, and really that's where it took off. We started looking at the contact lenses. We started looking at nanoparticles, putting nanoparticles, which are very, very small particles, into the contact lens to work on releasing the drug, and that's really from there then a couple of years of postdocing, working with Niall in the PMBRC as a technology leader, I think was the name of the role, and then from there got a lecture and post in WIT. So I've been working at that for the last number of years.
It's okay, we're not counting.
5 or 6.
But what I think is interesting about that is, I suppose it's a non-traditional entry. If you assume that a traditional entry is somebody does the leaving cert, then they do a bachelor degree, an undergraduate degree in some scientific discipline or whatever it might be, then you go on and do your postgrad and blah, 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 blah. So you don't come into higher education until your mid-20s. And obviously it's worked out quite well for you.
I'm very happy where I am. Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the journey itself was one that kind of made me realise how important it is to do something that you enjoy doing, and something that kind of takes your interest while you're working at it, and increasingly working in this area in particular, in ocular therapeutics. And as the projects have grown and developed, we've met more of the people that these technologies are designed to help in the future. And you really kind of get a sense of, well, okay, this might only be a small part of developing a new technology, but it is for a good reason, and it's for, it's something that could help people sometime in the future. And, so it's good to kind of have that motivation as well to work on it. But yeah.
Deadly. Tess, you were nodding away there while Larry was chatting. So you're no offense to you, Niall, but Tess has a more interesting accent than you do. Tess, so I'm going to go by from your accent that you're not from Waterford or the surrounding areas originally.
No. I'm from Seattle. Yeah.
Okay, so how do you end up here?
Yeah, talk about another kind of non-traditional pathway, I guess. I did the traditional go to school, go to university when you turn 18. I had dreams of being a writer or some sort of written artist. I had dreams then of being a linguist. I had dreams then of being a UN representative. I had all these dreams to, ultimately I knew I wanted to be in Europe and work in that sphere. I studied politics and mostly political science, huge focus on neo-colonial policies and neoliberalism, which is what brought me to Ireland in the first place for a master's degree at NUIG focused on post-colonial studies. It's very, not a lot of people would even consider that a thing.
Yeah.
And then I started working in education as a project manager. I think a lot of the skills you learn in sort of the liberal arts and the social sciences would be communicating and project management and time management. So I learned that I really enjoyed working in education. I did travel back to the US for a couple of years where I worked at University of Washington as a project manager for EU projects, but ultimately decided to move back to Ireland. My husband is Irish. And then I worked in kind of private sector industry, again in project management, but I missed the work of education. The purpose of working in education is that you're supporting students. I think I've learned that I'm very mission oriented in my work. So when this job became available to come over to Waterford, even though it was in a field I hadn't spent much time in, I felt that it could be a place to leave a mark and a good place to do work that supports good work. And again, as Larry mentioned, a lot of the work is focused on the patient perspective. What we do is really focused on the people that this may impact. And we know it might not impact them this year, or it definitely won't impact them this year, but it could impact them in 20 years or 30 years' time. And we've spent a lot of time working and discussing with patients and clinicians and the people. And that's something that really mattered to me. So it was what brought me to Waterford, and I have no intention of leaving now.
Well, you're very welcome. Again, what's interesting about that is the kind of the multi-disciplines that you've obviously worked in and studied in along the way. And again, nobody's locked in a particular box, and you can't get out of that box.
No, I think,
and I think that's one of the benefits, particularly of the American system, where you do have a kind of a broader education, particularly in college.
Yeah.
Whereas here we are tended to lock into a discipline quite early. Now you can break out of that, but it maybe is a little bit more difficult, perhaps.
Yeah, and that's something that I really took advantage of in the university I went to. It was a non-traditional university, so there were no degrees, or there was degrees, but there was no grades, there was no finals, there were no exams. It was, everyone's just smiling, but it was just a different, my mom would call it a hippy-dippy university. But it did a lot for me in regards to self-motivation, and what you submitted had to be important to you and it had to matter. And it really framed, I think, a lot of the way that then I would go through my career, because I got to pick my path.
Yes.
And I wasn't going to be withheld within boundaries. Yeah.
Excellent. Which is, again, if you said to yourself back then that you would be working in the Ocular Therapeutics research group in Waterford, you swear, who is that now?
Yeah.
I know, making robot eyes.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Right, Niall, so yourself, you're not from Waterford either originally.
No, I'm from Cavan originally, yeah.
Okay, so how do you end up here, and how do you end up in the role that you're in now?
Yeah, so I really like science in secondary school. Chemistry in particular just kind of clicked with me. So I studied industrial chemistry at the University of Limerick. There's no universities in Cavan, so I had to get out somewhere, and Limerick is where I ended up. So I did my degree there for 4 years. And then I got a job in Elan Drug Delivery in Athlone, which is now Alkermes, but at the time it was an Irish company, Elan, and they were a really innovative company in the whole area of drug delivery, developing new technologies in that area. So I worked there for 4 years. I was actually made redundant from Elan, so I'm sure maybe some people listening may have had shares in Elan and have been scarred by the whole process. Lots of people lost a lot of money in Elan shares at the time. So it went through financial difficulties. I was made redundant. I was in my mid-20s and I decided at that point to go and do a PhD. So I went back to the University of Limerick, did my PhD there in protein chemistry, so slightly different to what I had kind of worked on during my work experience. And then at that point I was getting married towards the end of my PhD. My wife, or now wife, was working in Clonmel, so I needed a job somewhere close to Clonmel. So I ended up getting a job in Genzyme, which is now Sanofi here in Waterford. And that's it. I worked there for a couple of years. And then the opportunity came up to head up the PMBRC, which was about 13 years ago now at this stage. And I've been here ever since.
Okay, and you're very welcome as well.
Thank you.
So 3 blow-ins to the town,
pretty much.
but you're very, very welcome. And again, what's interesting there is that you didn't go straight from a bachelor's degree to a postgrad.
Yeah, that was, I suppose at the end of my bachelor's degree, I was kind of, I won't say sick of college, but I'd been in full-time education, I guess, for 18 years or thereabouts at that point, 17, 18 years. So I just felt like I wanted to get a bit of experience in industry, and I really enjoyed it. It was a great time in my life, and that. But I noticed just when I was in industry, particularly in R&D, a lot of the managers there all had PhDs, and I guess to kind of progress up through management and so on, I realised that a PhD was a must-have if you want to work in R&D. So that was one of the motivators for me to go back and do a PhD at the time. Plus, I was in my mid-20s. I had a redundancy package. It wasn't mega bucks, but it was enough along with the funding to get me through. Yeah,
brilliant. Right, so let's get back to the OTRG, the Ocular Therapeutics Research Group. How many staff have you got? Staff and students. How big is the group? I mean, it's not just the 3 of you.
Oh, so there's probably, I think it's around 10 PhD students and researchers working at this stage. We've, again, 1 or 2 are working on slightly different projects. We have a COVID project and an antimicrobial resistance project as well, where they use the technologies that we have developed and have been working on over the years. So there's about 8 to 10 PhD researchers at any one time. We have some leaving and then some new PhD students. And then there's probably about 10 associated staff who work as principal investigators on some of those projects, co-supervisors. Obviously Tess, who runs everything orbital and, to be fair, OTRG related in terms of organisation. And then we have a new postdoc joining us in a couple of months, and a few interns and secondees from different places in Europe. So
you've mentioned Orbital. What is Orbital?
Yeah, so Orbital is what's called an innovative or European training network, and it's funded by the Mari Sclerosa Curie Actions in Horizon 2020, as it was at the time.
An EU funded.
An EU funded project, yeah. So European funded project, and really what it focuses on, and I'm going to hand over to Tess, who does a much better job of explaining the nuts and bolts of it. But it's really to train 15 early stage researchers, which are PhD researchers across Europe. So up to 15. So in our case, we started out with 15, and I think we have 14 now. But again, Tess can correct me. And we're basically, it has an overarching goal to develop treatments for posterior segment diseases. So those back of the eye diseases that we talked about, such as diabetic retinopathy, age-related macular degeneration. So these are typically diseases of aging populations, or so for AMD, for example, is one of the leading causes of blindness for people over 50. And these are the diseases and conditions that are typically require intravitreal injections, which are those injections that we talked about into the eye. And we're looking at lots of different ways to develop that. But we have 21 partners across Europe, the US and Canada, and then 14 researchers around Europe working in that area.
Okay, so the organisational structure is there's PMBRC, which is a kind of a larger scientific research group in WIT. There's the Ocular Therapeutics Research Group, which is your lot, which is yourselves and all those people you've just mentioned. But then you have Orbital, which is a training cluster specifically for postgrad researchers in this area, and that's EU funded. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's EU funded, and it's coordinated by us here in WIT within the PMBRC. So.
And is that just for here, or is there are there similar stations throughout Europe?
So it's a fairly big funding mechanism, so there will be different training networks for different areas. This specific one, Orbital, as we call it, Ocular Research by Integrated Training and Learning, because it's a training network. This is focused, it's coordinated from here, so we have 3 researchers based here in WIT, and then we have researchers in the UK, in Northern Ireland and Spain, and they're hosted in either a company or a academic organisation, and they work from there.
Okay. I have a tech background, and I thought we were bad for acronyms. You're leaving us in the halfpenny place, lads. So fair play to you. Right. So, okay. So, Tess, one of your roles then is to kind of manage that disparate group of people in that area. Okay. That must be a tough one, is it?
It's definitely the largest, well, not largest consortium I've managed, but the most spread out consortium I've ever managed. And it's been a great experience. And to be honest, the team members, Larry put together this team, I think, well before I came in. And the team that's been created is just absolutely outstanding. So I would work really closely with all the PIs or the professors and all the other institutions, as well as the researchers, the PhD students. And everyone is really communicative and really participatory. And those things make it quite easy. But of course, it comes with some challenges around logistics, funding, the parts that I manage would be kind of really nitty-gritty details that, no one needs to hear about, but that part can be a little bit challenging sometimes.
Well, one of the things that I've learned from this podcast is the intangible aspects of research are actually the most important bits. You see the publication, and I'm not going to ask you for a list of publications because you can just, if somebody wants to do that, they can just Google you and find all of that. But you see the publications are there, but it's all the bits that go in between that. We're talking to another researcher recently on the podcast, and a huge amount of her time was spent just trying to get people to talk to her in this context. And it's a very, so I can imagine the amount of work that goes into that. And I imagine it's similar for yourself. It's like trying to pull all these people together, and it's not as easy as just pressing a button and something happens.
No, and in fact, we just hosted a workshop in Lisbon called the Patient as the Teacher Workshop, and that was probably the first time that we had attempted to bring patients, clinicians, industry representatives, our researchers, professors, carers, people that live and deal with sight loss and vision impairment all together in a room. And the build up to that, I think that was about 8 months of planning and consistent recruitment for the past 3 months. And it went really well. I think it was a really good event. I think we learned incredible things just hearing patients actually talk about their experiences. But it was proof that getting patients in the room and hearing that opinion is necessary and extremely difficult to do.
Okay, so let's try and tie this together then. So you're dealing with these therapeutics for the eye, specifically the back of the eye is the area that you're most concerned with.
For Orbital, yes. For Orbital. Yeah.
But the overall OTRG group is the whole eye?
Yeah, we look at the front of the eye and the back of the eye.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So, and as you've mentioned, the eye it's a very complicated organ. It is an organ, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. I never know. Is that an organ?
I was nodding, but I didn't know for sure.
Is it an organ or is it a piano? I don't know. Right. Okay. So the eye, it's a complicated machine inside another complicated machine. You're looking at these non-invasive methods, but what I find very interesting about this event that you just talked about is that it's not just a case of you're dictating this is how it should be done. You're trying to go back to the patient and find out what works for them, what doesn't work for them. So how did that event work? What did you learn from it? How was it formed?
Yeah, so we partnered with a foundation called the World Cafe. So they host World Cafe or workshops all over the world. And basically the idea is that they're facilitated conversations kind of in 20-minute clusters. you're given kind of a set question that is very open-ended and leaves a lot of room for discussion. So where a researcher might have one idea of an answer, a patient might have a very different idea of an answer. So the idea was to bring everyone together to discuss, who is involved, who's in the sight loss community, who does that incorporate, and who needs to be there that's not there. That was kind of what we were looking at, because I think researchers in particular, and as I'm kind of outside of the research community, tell me if I'm wrong. But I think researchers in particular see themselves in the lab, and that's what they see. And they see the work in the lab, and they see the test tubes, and they see, the contact lens, and they see the nanoparticles, and they say, that's what I do. But the impact of that outwardly is huge. And so at this workshop, we realized, there was a lot of suggestions to bring in more educators so that people who are not blind or not living with sight loss are educated on the lives of people living with sight loss. So there was ideas that the research happening now needs to work in tandem with government policies happening now to make the current world we live in more accessible for everyone, but also to improve future outcomes for treatments. It was like it kind of seemed like both things were coming out at once in this workshop. And I think it was really eye-opening for our researchers because they realized that they were giving a little bit of hope to some of these sort of non-treatable or non-curable things. So we might be able to pause the sort of effects of like AMD, but right now it doesn't really cure. There's no cure. So the idea that maybe there's hope in the future, but for now, how can we also make it more livable were two things that really came out of the workshop.
Okay, so can you give me an example of one of those open-ended questions that might be asked?
Yeah, so one of the questions was, you're throwing a dinner party for the sight loss community. Who do you invite?
Oh.
And yeah, that's where we learned a lot. A lot of people wanted educators. A lot of people wanted social media influencers. The researchers wanted scientists. We heard a lot of people ask for government officials to come in. We heard a lot of people ask for city planners, urban planning to come in. It was just a really diverse... Entrepreneurs,
people with
funders,
money, philanthropists. And this was coming a lot from the people living with those conditions, and they wanted young researchers, people before they even started the research, to just understand where they could have an impact in the future.
So again, that's fascinating, because that is not the question that I would have expected. Bear in mind, I have no knowledge of this area, but do you, I'm thinking of do you like to take your eye drops? Is possibly a question that I'd be thinking of, but what you're asking is it's much broader. Yeah,
and the idea there was that it would open conversations up to get people comfortable talking.
Yes.
And then through the follow-up conversations and through more, we'd get to hear, those nitty-gritty details of how do you feel with taking, 10 eye drops a day, or what does a daily, injection mean for you, or a weekly injection? What are these treatment options and how can we improve them? And we did ultimately get there in the end for a lot of the discussion. There was a lot of that conversation, but we wanted to leave it open-ended because the idea, I think, was for our researchers, maybe not for their current projects right now, but in the future when they enter the research world and they get to pose the initial research question, that they think about it from a user-first perspective, from who will this impact most.
Yes.
So that was the ultimate goal.
So again, if I was to be utilitarian about it, let's say you've learned that, I have no idea about this, but let's say somebody needs to take 10 drops a day at regular intervals, and they say, I don't like doing that. I don't do it. I find I forget, blah, blah, blah. So that would inform the researchers that maybe the next set of drops or next drops technology maybe should be once a day or twice a day. Or possibly not a drops technology at all. Maybe something else that's a bit more passive. Which then is informing your research, which is now often with this contact lenses you're leading up with now.
That's one part of it, but a lot of it is focused on drops. But you're exactly right, and it's that kind of posing that next research question, really finding out, because like I say, we're scientists, let's say, and we're working in the lab, and we think, okay, we're going to make this contact lens, but we never think about, not that we don't, but we're increasingly thinking about, and this is why we're having these conversations, well, do people like contact lenses? Would a contact lens actually be useful?
Yes.
Maybe people are happy with getting injections, and the truth of it is, when that injection prevents further sight loss, people are okay with that. But if we can then increase or reduce the amount of injections, for example, by having an eye drop with a nanotechnology, for example, in that, where it prevents having to get that injection every month or every 3 months and pushes it back to every 6 months or once a year. These are the kind of things that we look at then.
And right, again, I don't know. I mean, you hopefully would know this, but would it be fair to say that there are a lot of people who maybe patients who don't engage with the therapies because of those reasons? As in, I know some people in my own life who are mostly men who are terrible for, I won't do that, I'll put that off, and then it gets worse.
So around the injections, I mean, there are statistics and, published studies which show that there is a drop off and that many people don't go back for it. Probably talking to clinicians, certainly locally and nationally, people go for their treatment and I've talked to people who've had up to 100 injections in their eye because they understand, and because sight loss is such a terrifying thing for people, so they go for it. But again, some of the conditions that we look at, so that's for the back of the eye disease, for example. Some cases we look at treatments for post-cataract surgery. So if people get cataracts, they then have to use drops a number of times a day for a few days, up to every hour and then every 4 hours and so on, tapering off. And a lot of those people can be maybe in older demographics, have reduced mobility, and it can be really, really hard to add those drops. So then if we can reduce the amount of drops, or if we can make a contact lens that, a cataract surgery in the developed world is relatively straightforward. So people go in, they're out in the day, maybe then they can get that bandage lens and put that on, and it releases the drug into the eye. It prevents somebody having to worry about the drops, and they just have to worry about getting better, and kind of getting back up. So there's other things we look at then. There's a condition called dry eye disease. And this is something that affects about, depending on where you look, but the figures are typically accepted to be around 350 million people in the world, and they're increasing then, and it's from every age. And this is something we've discovered through our research recently, that the figures show that more and more young people are getting dry eye from increasing games, screen time and so on. And then it's all the way up to people in their 80s and older, for a range of reasons. So many people have to use a lot of drops a day, so it can be up to 15 drops a day, multiple different types of drops. So if you can combine that into one drop, or even just something that they can put on in the morning and forget about it, but it eases. So dry eye basically gives, red, sore, gritty eyes. It can be really, it can take a number of forms, but typically this is the, red, sore, gritty eyes are what they would describe as a feeling of sand maybe in the eye, and things like that. So people would use multiple drops throughout the day. So if you can combine those, have it in one drop, somebody puts on once a day, that's an improvement on where people are and what they have to live with.
Okay, right. I can see where you're coming from again with that, and I can see the practical applications of it. But equally, I'd imagine you're doing stuff that's perhaps a little bit more basic research, that's a little bit feeling out around the edges as well in certain respects. Or is it all applied?
I suppose we would probably try and keep it as applied as possible.
Okay.
We do definitely have some blue skies kind of research, and that probably comes in where I suppose the end use would be applied. So our end use in that case would be an eye drop that would reduce the number of drops a day, or a contact lens that would prevent injections. Where we look at the blue skies aspect of it is within the technologies within that. How can we reduce those number of drops? So I mentioned nanoparticles a few times. There's a lot of work we do there, and these are particles that are about 1 million times smaller than the width of a human hair. And although Niall can correct me, I could get my numbers wrong on that. It's that or smaller. Basically, so what we look at there is how can we design that nanoparticle? Can we put something there that makes it only stick on the surface of the eye, or helps it cross those barriers of the eye which are so difficult to get through? So like I said, the eye stops things going from the front to the back. Can we design something that we can add new functionality, so different types of chemistries that we could use, or make it from a different material that allows it to change its behavior as it encounters different parts of the body? And that's where we can have the blue skies or basic research elements to it.
And is that where the benefits of the PMBRC connection comes in? In that right now, I could get my tenses or my terms wrong here, but let's say you're talking about an area of molecular biology or something like that, and maybe you don't have somebody directly on the team who you can even talk to about that. Whereas you say, Niall, is there anyone else? And there might be somebody else in the group who you can get into that area with.
Yeah, I think if you look at the overall team and the people involved in OTRG, you've got chemists, biologists, molecular biologists. So there's quite a broad team. We bring in outside expertise as well. So we've ophthalmologists advising us as well. So it's we like in science nowadays, it's very much multidisciplinary. It's not just chemists working away, plugging away on nanoparticles or whatever. You need to bring in much broader group in there, and so that's what we do. And I think in PMBRC, I lose count every now and again. It's just about almost 40 researchers, and then you've got another 20 members of academic staff involved. So, even if you need a statistician or if you need a physicist or something like that, we don't have to go far to look for people who can help us out on different things.
So when you're thinking about those, I don't want to say bigger questions because that denotes value, but I'd say those more abstract questions, you're able to ponder those. You could work on them for a while, however long that while might be, and then you could maybe come back and try and apply it through some sort of technology later on.
Yeah,
or am I being reductive? And if I am, tell me.
No, I think you always have the end goal in mind. Okay, we need a better way to treat a disease which isn't currently been treated adequately at the moment. And, in a research environment, you have the freedom to try different things and have a go at stuff and for the sake of it, which you probably don't have that same kind of freedom in industry, let's say. So we can try stuff out. We have 4th-year project students, who might be working away on some aspect of it. So, that's low risk stuff. If it doesn't work out, that's okay. If it does work out, maybe we get a PhD student to look at it. So there's various different ways that we can kind of develop some of this blue sky stuff that Larry was saying. And then potentially, if it's looking promising, we can then kind of move it forward into a more formal project then. Okay.
So PMBRC, OTRG, Orbital.
Yeah.
There's another. It's not an acronym. It's a what's a portmanteau? Is that what the word is? Ocudel. What's Ocudel, Niall?
So Ocudel is a spin-out company from PMBRC. It originally came out of a commercialisation fund project, which Larry got funding for a number of years ago. And for maybe people who aren't familiar, Enterprise Ireland Fund have this commercialisation fund. So if you have a technology and also a market, which is critical from an EI point of view, if you have those two together, you can potentially look for funding to try and take your idea from the lab into commercialisation. And so they'll fund you for up to 3 years to do not just the technical aspects. So we're quite comfortable, as scientists working away in the lab, and we'd happily work away on that for a number of years. From the EI point of view, they also want you to develop the business aspect of it as well. Show that there's a real need there for the technology. Show that there's a market, that people will buy it. Have a look at the competitors that are out there. Speak to ophthalmologists, speak to patients, get all that information and show there's a business case. So it's not just a matter of developing the technology. You also have to show that the technology will potentially be commercialised.
Yeah, and I'd imagine there's also probably manufacturing issues, scaling up issues. It's all well and good you might model something in a lab, but can that be replicated a million times or however many, 350 million times, as you said?
Yeah, and this is a problem in industry. I worked when I worked in Elon, for example, we were at phase 1, so very early stage development, and we always made stuff at maybe a 1 kilo scale, but we knew that you'd have to make it up at a metric ton maybe at some point in the future. With eye drops and ocular therapeutics, I guess the scale is a bit lower, because you're only putting maybe relatively small amounts of the medicine into your eye, but nonetheless you have to be able to scale it up from, we'd say, a lab scale into commercial scale. And it also has to be something which, ideally a technology where a manufacturing site would have that equipment on site as well. Okay, so at some point you want to get a contract manufacturer maybe to make this at what we call good manufacturing practice level. So this is kind of an industry standard needed before you can put drops or put a medicine into a human. So again, the technology ideally should be out there already. And, Larry and I are both looking at ways in which we can make the nanoparticles in relatively, standard equipment.
And I'd imagine, like you talk about there, this is probably standard practice, but I imagine quality is such a huge issue, because you can't have, like, in the tech industry, everyone says if the tech industry was like a car industry, it would have, you'd release a car, it catches fire and it explodes.
Yeah.
But then you make a better one, you go on. So, if a piece of software doesn't work, a consumer piece of software doesn't work, it's not too bad. Like you can just fix it and patch it and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, if you're producing substandard eye drops or contact lenses that perhaps damage the eye, well, that obviously is a major issue. Even if there was only a small, let's say it was 98% were fine, but 2% were 2%. That's huge.
Yeah, it is absolutely. Yeah, and the whole industry is incredibly regulated. It's everything from your raw materials coming in. You have to make sure that they're up to a certain standard. You can't just buy them in at that standard. You actually have to go to the supplier site, have a route around, do an audit of their manufacturing process, the training, all of that kind of thing. That's just for the raw materials coming in. Then you have to test them. You have to make sure all your staff are trained, all your equipment is calibrated, your processes are validated, your analytical methods are validated. Everything is really controlled to a very high level. The paperwork is very extensive, and when you file the product, then you've got dossiers like the height of the ceiling here of material, reports, technical data, all that kind of stuff. It's a huge undertaking to take a product from, we'd say, a lab and bring it to a commercial product. And that's where the cost goes. People ask, well, why are medicines so expensive? Well, they're so expensive because you have to do all of this work just to get it there. But you could fail along the way. You could get to phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials and fail, and all the money that you have sunk into it at that point is now lost. So your next product that you develop, if it does make it to the market, it has to pay not just for itself, but for all the things that failed along the way as well.
Yeah, and for everyone that goes to market, there could be 99 that don't.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You don't hear about it.
I'm not sure what the numbers are exactly, but it's quite high. And you hear, especially when you get to phase 3 clinical trial, these are, you have to do major trials. A lot of people have to be recruited into the trials, so it's they're really, really expensive, and if it fails at that point, the costs are quite significant.
Yeah. So I know you have produced a number, like you've loads of publications, papers. You've also filed some patents as well, if I'm correct. I don't need to get into the nuts and bolts of that, but that's kind of the intellectual currency, or the intellectual property that comes out of your work. Would that be fair? Yeah. Right. So what's next then? What's on the kind of the immediate agenda for all of the optical therapeutics research group and subsequent associated groups, Orbital and Ocular?
Yeah, so glad you asked that, because I wanted to kind of say, like, at the moment, so if we take the dry eye disease that we mentioned and are developing our technologies for that, what we really want to do is, because of Orbital, we've had a really great chance to talk to patients living with sight loss, but now we want to talk to more people who are living with dry eye disease. Okay, and so really we're kind of putting out a call now for people in WIT, and anyone who listens to this, to contact us and to really have an interview with us and to just sit down and share their experience of dry eye, because we're at that stage of the technology development and the commercialization part of it, again funded by Enterprise Ireland. So we are looking at really what do people want in a treatment for dry eye disease. So we'd love to hear from anybody who is even feels like they might have dry eye disease, and it can be mild, like I have, for example, where I use drops 3 or 4 times a day and it gets kind of sore, my eyes get sore, but it can be quite severe for people as well. We'd love to hear all kind of patients' experience and people's experience with it, really, like, so, and then we will.
No, I was just going to ask you, what are the symptoms of dry eyes?
So like I said, so if I just take me, I mean, they just get sore, your eyes feel sore. So as somebody described to me, you shouldn't be able to feel your eyes, right? So that's the thing. So if you feel that that your kind of eyelids are rubbing, or that it's just tired, even just tired eyes can be a symptom of dry eye disease. And again, I'm no clinician, so I can only speak from my own, but what people usually say are red, if your eyes are very red, if you have sore, if they feel gritty, if there's sand in them, if they, a lot of times counterintuitively, you can have very watery eyes from dry eyes because your eyes are trying to produce more tears to kind of keep them lubricated and so on. And there's lots of different reasons and different causes for it. So it's really multifactorial, as they say, lots of different causes for it. So that's where we are on that particular project. Again, it's a commercialization project. We have commercial researchers, we have technical researchers. So we're at the phase there where we're trying to really describe the patient journey and what they want in a technology, and that's in that part of it. So for there, I mean, in orbital side of things, I'll hand over to Tess. She's good, but
Just before we go to orbital, to the people you're looking to speak to with the dry eye study, is there any particular group of people? Is it like people in this age bracket? Is it males, females?
There's some studies that will say that it impacts on females more than males at certain ages, but really what we're seeing and the people we've talked to now, it's everybody at all ages, from very young to any age really. And it is again something that can get worse as you get older, certainly. But then it can be lifestyle, it can be environment, it can be associated with other illnesses or medication. So it's for everybody. So if anybody wants to contact us and discuss it, we'll be putting out another call again at some stage. But just email myself or Tess, and we can discuss it.
Okay, well, we get contact details at the end. But again, if you just search for Larry Fitzhenry or Tess Ames, OTRG, you'll find all of that details. Or Niall, sorry, I didn't mean to forget you, Niall. You'll find Niall O'Reilly as well. So Tess, what's next with Orbital? What's on the kind of the immediate future for you?
So we still have 2 years left of this project. The funding runs until February 2024. So right now we're in the process of, making sure that the training part of the network continues and that as many of our researchers complete their PhDs and move on to their next phase. So hopefully we'll see a lot more from them in regards to, again, as we discussed, publications and kind of outputs and maybe some patents and things. But we're also hoping to start an application for another EU-funded project. They're now called doctoral networks. They've shortened the acronym. So now it's just a DN instead of an ITN.
Okay.
So we're getting ready to prepare something that will still look at ocular disease and probably novel drug delivery. We're still formulating what disease is and will it be posterior, anterior, front, or back of the eye. But hopefully just a continuation to keep developing sort of novel treatments for many of these diseases that just need new options.
Deadly. And Niall, for yourself, what's in the immediate future for you? I know you've got a lot of hats on.
Sure.
Like in the context of this conversation,
well, I guess Ocudel is probably the most relevant one then. So when Larry and I were spinning out the company, we started looking at commercial opportunities, and it came to our attention that dry eye is not just a problem for humans but also for animals as well. So it turns out that about 5% of dogs at some point in their lives will actually suffer from dry eye disease, and you're probably aware, I think everyone's aware now that pet ownership has increased a lot over the last number of years. It was increasing before the pandemic. I think it went up considerably during the pandemic as well, and people are treating their pets now almost like a member of the family, humanising them if you want, and willing to spend substantial amounts of money in treating conditions that their pets may get. So we're actually looking to commercialise some of the technologies, dry eye disease technologies in animals, and in particular in dogs.
Wow, that's amazing. That's super vet. Yeah. Like you'd be on an episode of that soon. Yeah. Right, so we have PMBRC, Ocular Therapeutics Group, the Orbital Network, and there's the Ocudel spin-out as well. So of the three of you sitting in front of us, who's the boss?
Definitely Larry.
Would that be fair, Larry?
It's a team. To be honest, I mean, in all, as I said, there's people working in all parts of it, and I mean, we all come under the one umbrella. Luckily, we're working, in this one particular area and have this specific focus. But no, I would say it's definitely a team effort.
Spoken like a true politician. Yeah. Right. I have a last question before we get the kind of the nuts and bolts contact information, and it's a question I've asked I think everyone who's been on 9+ so far. Is imagine there was somebody listening to this who was potentially thinking about getting into research. They might be young, they might not be so young. They might be they might be a postdoc who kind of fell out of things. They might be on an undergraduate degree or wherever else on that continuum. If I was to ask you for one bit of advice to give them, and it doesn't matter what discipline, I mean, it can be specific to the scientific area you are or whatever, what would it be? One piece of advice for somebody thinking about getting into research or exploring some areas. Niall, we'll start with yourself.
I think with research, it's really, it's really exciting, but you also have to be willing to stick with it and be willing to there's going to be moments where you're going to struggle. It's not a nice kind of linear path that you're going to follow in your PhD or your research or whatever research you end up doing. You're going to run into problems. You need to be comfortable with that. And I think when I left my degree, I started working in industry. I was working in R&D. I kind of found that a bit hard initially because lots of stuff you tried just doesn't work. So by the time I came to do my PhD, having spent 4 years in industry, I was actually quite comfortable with stuff not working for me. So I think you do need to be, curious. It needs to interest you as well. I mean, if you're going to devote 4 years of your time into a subject, make sure it's something that you actually are interested about and you're curious, and just be willing to work through the problems as they arise. You will eventually get there, but you just need to be patient and be comfortable with that.
Larry?
Yeah, I think Niall pretty much covered most of it, but I think try and make sure you know what your motivation is for doing it. So if it's something like a PhD, understand why you want to do a PhD, that where that's going to lead you or where that could potentially lead you, and really just try enjoy it. If you do decide to do it, try and make the most of it and enjoy the process. As Niall says, there's a lot of ups and downs, there's a lot of difficulties, but there's a lot of good things in it as well, and it certainly does keep your interest, if you find a subject and an area that you like. So think about what you want to do and why you want to do it, I would say, and then go with your gut on it.
Brilliant. And Tess, yourself, same question.
Yeah, again, I would say that Niall and Larry have covered that pretty solidly. I was going to say stay curious, I think, is the most important thing. And also something my dad used to tell me is don't close doors on yourself. And if you do close it, don't lock it, because you just might not know in 2 years that path didn't interest you then, but it might now. Science was never my dream. I think I blew up many test tubes in high school science class. But I never locked that door. It was always an option. So leave things open, because there's opportunity everywhere, no matter what you study. Yeah, wonderful. There are 3 nuggets there, I think, of information. If somebody wanted to find out more about you, about any of the groups, where should they go? So let's say, Niall, if somebody wants to find out about PMBRC, where should they go? Yeah, so pmbrc.org is our website, and we also have a Twitter account at PMBRC_WIT. And actually, probably the Twitter account is the one that gets updated the most, and all the news and pictures and stuff like that. So that's probably a good place to go. Deadly. And so, Larry, for the Ocular Therapeutics Research Group, where should they go? Yeah, so again, Twitter at OTRG_PMBRC. We should have the Ocular Therapeutics Research Group page on the WIT website at this stage, so you should be able to search it and find it. But they're probably the 2 best places. And Tess, say for Orbital, if somebody wanted to find out about Orbital, where should they go? Yeah, you can go to orbital-itn.eu online, and there you'll find we're on Twitter, we're on SoundCloud, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, and all of them are linked there. So we're very active on all of those channels. And if anyone wanted to find you personally, I'm sure you have probably profiles on the WIT website, LinkedIn, is it? Yeah, I just said to people to be careful. There is a Niall O'Reilly Hair and Beauty business in Waterford. That's not me. So if you put in Niall O'Reilly WIT, I think you'd probably be safe enough. Okay, fair enough. And if not, well, you might learn something as well. Okay, so Niall O'Reilly, Larry Fitzhenry, or are you often professionally Lawrence Fitzhenry? I think when I set up my email, I put my full name on it, so now it always comes in as Lawrence Fitzhenry. But Larry or Lawrence, I think will find me either way. Yeah. He'll find you. And Tess Ames, and that's spelled AMES. Yeah. And again, if you just search for you on the thing, you'll find you in wherever it is. Folks, thank you very, very much for speaking with me today. It's genuine to be educational, and it's been a bit of crack as well. I wish you all the best with Ocudel.
I hope you go on to make loads of money and help loads of people, and then you can come back and, you know, maybe buy us a new microphone for the studio or something like that.
Thanks a lot, Rob.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah.
Cheers, folks. Thanks.
man.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of 9+. If so, please check out our previous ones to learn more about research at WIT. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at 9+podcast. We'll take a break over Easter, but we'll be back in a few weeks with some more episodes to round off the academic year. Until then, good luck.